Hi, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Louise Duncan with Can Do MS. Tonight, we will be focusing on staying resilient through MS transitions. Thank you for being with us on our webinar Wednesday. We're excited to get started. We will save about 20 minutes at the end of this webinar for questions and answers. If you have a question during the presentation, you can type it out using the questions and chat box found in the control panel. This presentation is being recorded and will be archived on Can Do MS websites. You can download a copy of tonight's presentation and additional resources from your control panel. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our Can Do MS coaches for the evening. First up is Matt. Matt is based in Cleveland, Ohio, and affiliated with Cleveland Clinic, where he specializes in psychology. Thanks for being here, Matt.
Absolutely.
Next, we have Megan. Megan is a nurse practitioner based in Jacksonville, Florida. She has been a multiple sclerosis certified nurse since 2005. Thanks for being with us, Megan.
Thanks, Louise. Happy to be here.
I'm going to go ahead and jump into our learning objectives for the evening. First up is recognize the unpredictable changes that occur in MS and other areas of life. Learn how emotional and cognitive resilience is associated with better coping and lower distress. Identify the factors associated with resilience in persons with MS and how resilience can be measured. Offer resources to improve resilience, including goal setting. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Megan and With that, I'm going to turn things over to Megan and Matt and launch our first poll of the evening. 1 second to get that poll launched. Cool.
All right, so if you guys could go ahead and answer this question, what activities help you stay resilient? Some examples are exercise, meditation, eating healthy, or perhaps there's something else that you do that helps give you a feeling of resiliency. And in that case, you can type your answer into the question or chat box. It looks like exercise is winning. Eating healthy is coming in a close second. I'm going to take a peek at the chat box here. Thanks. Sleep, yoga, crocheting, spending time in nature, relationships, faith, CBD oil, alone time in video games, spending time with friends, gratitude, positive attitude, reading, Bible study, listening to music. Thank you, guys. This is great. I'm organizing the house perhaps as we speak, painting with acrylics, life skills. I'm not sure yet. That's probably why you're here, right? Staying connected to others, nothing, social connections, laughter, singing, staying positive, being stubborn and music, visiting friends, art. So actually lots of art in here. I find that's pretty interesting and also super awesome because art is a great therapeutic activity for staying resilient, for anxiety, for depression as well. I don't know, I'm not surprised that meditation is on the low end of the spectrum. How about you, Matt?
No, likely it's not something that folks necessarily associate with something like resilience, and hopefully that's something that we can even touch on a little bit this evening and kind of point out how that might be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think meditation is probably something that seems like, oh, insurmountable, takes too long, kind of scary. So hopefully we'll change your mind on that. Well, you guys, as you know, life is unpredictable. What can you be sure will happen just as you planned it every single day? You know, if you have a planner and you write out things like I do with little boxes next to them, and then you actually have to redo it like 3 times. You just can never be sure that things are going to happen just as you plan. And so when we evaluate resilience, we think about how you feel and what happens when things don't go as planned on your schedule. So just for a moment, think about what happens in your mind when things don't go as planned and what happens in your body. And by that, I mean, where do you go? So if something doesn't happen the way you thought it was, do you go to a place of nothing ever happens right for me? I couldn't expect anything more than something to go wrong. Or do you go to a place of, well, okay, what's next? What can I do different? Okay, this didn't happen, so how can I change things to make what I wanted to do happen? And then in your body, literally what happens? So if you have a disappointment in your day, something doesn't go as planned, do you get a headache? Do your muscles feel tight? Do you have more spasticity? Does your tummy hurt? Does your bladder get spazzy? Do you get constipated? Do you have back pain? So literally, these things that happen in our daily lives that are unpredictable affect us in more ways than one, and they have the capacity to totally run us off the track if we don't know how to stay on the track. So let's talk about what we can do to cope with change, with challenges and unpredictability. Louise, we can go, thanks. So there are so many things that we can't control. So let's just, for a minute, and some of this is in jest, right? As much as we try, we can't control the weather. We can look at like the Weather Channel app, and then we wake up and it's 20 degrees warmer than we thought it was going to be, or there's a huge thunderstorm that we didn't know was going to come. We can't control traffic. I don't know how many of you are driving these days, but I have noticed in the past, I'm going to say 3 weeks, a return to near normal traffic in people who haven't been driving for 10 months. And so there's a lot of loss of control over traffic patterns, car accidents, how things are happening. We also can't control health challenges. To a great degree, we can't control financial challenges. We try the best that we can, but sometimes a medication contract changes with an insurance company, and something that was free to us last year is now $200 a month. We can't control birth. You can have a scheduled C-section and your baby comes early. We can't control death. We can't predict it. We can't control getting a concert ticket or a seat at a restaurant. Even in today's digital age, we still might have to wait in line and be disappointed. And today with COVID restrictions, the same thing goes for a restaurant with social distancing. And we can't control whether or not our store is out of something. And Lord knows things might not get to you in Amazon Prime Time. They might take 3 days instead of overnight. So as much as we try, there are plenty of things in our life that we can't control. And we really can learn from some of these smaller things and then adapt our thought patterns to bigger things. Next slide. MS is unpredictable. Nobody knows this better than you. You don't know what your symptoms are going to be like when you wake up in the morning. You might think that you have a pattern because that's how things have been for you for the past few months or few years, and wake up and something's different. You might wonder or worry every night when you go to bed if you'll wake up in the morning having had a relapse. Especially right now with COVID, I think probably less so now than a year ago. People were worried about running out of necessary medication because of supply and mail and being able to get in to see your doctor's office. And even still, we live in the era of specialty pharmacies that don't always deliver on time or in the manner that they say they do. And then you have to call your doctor's office and the doctor doesn't want to refill the medicine until it's exactly due. And then you're going to get it like an hour before you need it. And so there's a lot of those kinds of worries. You might think, well, my MS has been stable for so long, but what if something's happening under the scenes that I can't see? Will this always be the medication I take? What if my insurance changes? I mean, we could go on and on and on forever about the things that are unpredictable that could potentially cause us emotional challenge. That's part of the challenge. So the question that I like to ask, because I've faced this in my own life, is do you ever feel like some people just seem to be able to handle anything that is thrown at them, and they still get up in the morning with a smile on their face, and they still move forward and meet and sometimes exceed goals, and they're giving of their time and energy even though they're exhausted? There are people like that. The nurse, the MS nurse who taught me MS nursing is like that. And I often looked at her and I thought, man, you just had two really horrible things happen to you this month, and you're still able to give of yourself to other people. Why is that? How does that happen? And the answer to that is resilience.
And Megan, you know, something that that I'm thinking about, even as I see this on the screen now, it's even more challenging, I think, than in the past, because of the impact that social media can have on people. Typically, everybody kind of knows that person who posts all the good things, or doing all the stuff that's going on, and that comparison that can occur can drive some of that even more, and make it feel more distressing when, you know, you're seeing that from people online.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that, what do they call it? Like the perfect movie life that people post, when behind the scenes everything looks a lot different. Yeah, so then you wonder what's the truth and what's not. People want to portray a persona of resilience, right? But social media, I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. Staying off of it is a great way to remain resilient. Next slide, Louise. So I love these quotes, and these are just you know, kind of metaphorical definitions of resilience. So E.B. White, Charlotte's Web, the author of Charlotte's Web, said, "Hang on to your hat, hang on to your hope, and wind the clock, for tomorrow is another day." Emery Austin said, "Some days there won't be a song in your heart, sing anyway." And Carl Jung, who's a phenomenal psychologist from the early 1900s, mid 1900s, said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And all of these quotes, in one way or another, speak to resilience. And resilience doesn't necessarily mean that you always have to be positive. It means that you're able to overcome challenges, and see them as, you know, as things that you can overcome, rather than unmovable roadblocks. Next slide. So the definition of resilience is the ability to bounce back from difficult circumstances. And again, this doesn't mean that you're bouncing back with a smile on your face every time, but you can bounce back. It's the ability to find hope, meaning, and motivation to move forward in spite of obstacles. It's part nature and it's part nurture. So some people, just like the nurse I mentioned, there's something in her that was just born that way. She just was. But then there was a part in her that she nurtured with self-care, with, someone mentioned, prayer and faith. So there's part of both involved in resilience. And there's the power of perception. So just having that positive mental attitude and optimism about the future, and also optimism about the fact that there may be more than one choice to a potential outcome. And it is not, as I mentioned, it is not about being happy all the time. Life hands us lemons, and guess what? We make lemonade, and sometimes it's still sour. It still tastes yucky, but we made it. And that really is what resilience is.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, that this idea that sometimes when we talk about resiliency and this bouncing back, that it can get blended or can kind of get contaminated with this belief that it's about this naive sense of optimism, like, well, everything's fine, I'll figure it out. And it's not. And it includes a great deal of the actual part of overcoming something challenging. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. So when we talk about what resilience looks like in the literature and in research, it's kind of broken into these three broad categories. These are just factors that when we look at the characteristics that people who demonstrate resilience seem to possess, or behaviors that they seem to engage in, they cluster into these categories. And I'm not going to read through all these, but there is a tendency to see some of these things pull out quite clearly, actually, in the literature and in the research, some of which speak directly to what Megan was talking a little bit about, and you can kind of look at this list yourself. Those things on here that may seem a little bit more in that camp of nature, maybe some of those things that may seem a little bit more in the camp of nurture, or the things that people might kind of just be born more naturally with, versus some of those things that you might actually be able to work and develop. And I think that'll be an important part of this understanding with resilience, is that it is not a trait specifically. It's something that can be developed and grown. And these are some factors that we're going to talk a little bit more detail about as we go through the rest of this talk. All right. Research. Research is for researchers, question mark. This is kind of the moment where a lot of times people will hear the voice of the Peanuts, the teacher from Peanuts, the Charlie Brown teacher, that just goes wah, 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 and it's kind of like people kind of zone out. I do think, though, that it's vital that we talk about how research is involved in this, because so much of what we know from MS is driven by research and our understanding of the disease and what propels us forward. The same can be said about some of these psychological constructs. And I think that when we're able to drill this down into more of a research understanding, it provides some credence, some credibility to the fact that this is something that we actually can measure. Okay, and it has been, and that's part of this. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this idea of measuring resilience can really be helpful to identify protective factors, things that may be associated with people who are more adaptive, maybe better overall health, and that psychological, emotional, physical health. We talked about optimism, this idea of internal locus of control, and these are some more of those research terms, but internal locus of control really speaks to this idea of the belief that you have the ability to exert some sort of change, that you are responsible, you can take care of this, that you possess the ability to do something, versus looking at the world around you and say, well, it's too big, it's too challenging, it's the external world's fault, if you will. So the other side of this is that, yeah, it can be helpful to identify protective factors, but it can also be really helpful to identify areas where we might be vulnerable and can develop further when we start talking about building resiliency. And that's important, because if we spend time only focusing on those things that we already do really well or are really strong in, we might miss some really great opportunities to develop something we may not have thought of. And there are some measures that we're going to talk about here in a minute that'll outline that a little bit further. Next slide. One of the most common, if not the most common, rating scale for measuring resilience is this multiple sclerosis resilience scale, often referred to as the MSRS. This is all built in the literature. The important part of this, though, more than anything, I would say, is if you look at the categories, the what is being measured that can contribute to a person's ability to more successfully bounce back when something challenging happens. And it's comprised of your physical characteristics, emotional, cognitive, social, spiritual, and behavioral responses. By looking at these categories, we can start to identify those things that, and behaviors, thoughts, and we'll get into more detail, that might make someone a little bit better the next time at dealing with it, versus being very rigid in believing that, well, there's no point in doing one thing or the other because it's immutable, it's not going to change. This scale also is really good at helping to identify protective factors, things that enhance, promote resilience, and contribute to largely this greater quality of your life. And that's really what we're talking about. Next slide. All right, so this is going to be a little bit of a self-assessment. So if we can cue up that next polling question, Louise, similar to what we did on the front end. Now that we've talked so much about resiliency to this point, I'm wondering, what's one area that you've learned about so far, and we're going to get into more detail, that maybe you think you'd like to strengthen when it comes to resiliency? Is it a physical area, an emotional, cognitive, social, or spiritual? Are you able to see those, Megan, the responses coming in?
Yeah, if you click on polls, the little arrow next to polls.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Great.
So
So,
like physical wins again.
yeah, I can see that. And it's a good mix. I mean, a good split, and hopefully, we'll talk about this a little bit later. The impact of the pandemic on things like social connectedness. So that's something that we'll touch on here in a little bit too. Well, great. Looks like physical is coming out on top here. So something to do with physical well-being, and not surprising, especially with something like multiple sclerosis, where physical symptoms can be can feel so challenging. There's I guess that's the final.
Yeah, it looks like that's the final.
Okay, awesome. And we're going to talk more about each of those here in a little bit. All right. So, can we get the slide back up, Louise? Presentation. There we go. All right. So this is going to springboard us kind of into the next part of the talk. We're going to move from kind of defining resilience, talking a little briefly about how it's kind of looked at in the research and the literature, and we're going to use a lot of these terms to kind of guide the next piece here. I want you to be thinking about those questions at the bottom of that slide, because when you think about it, we're going to talk a little bit about goal setting and talking about real specific ways that you might go about identifying and challenging yourself to develop some skills and some ways to enhance the resiliency or grow resiliency in an area that maybe you weren't quite sure if it didn't think possible. So we'll talk about that. Next slide. All right. If you remember on the front end, one of the learning objectives we had talked about was this idea of understanding how emotional and cognitive resilience kind of works and is developed. This is the meat of a lot of what I do as a psychologist, and kind of getting into these areas with folks. It's an area that may be underappreciated in terms of how helpful it can be to deal with stressful events and challenges and bouncing back. This ability to adapt to stressful events without it affecting our internal motivation. It's the difference between this bend but don't break, and it's a very rigid kind of belief things, versus, okay, I'm broken and moving forward with the pieces. And that's important because it gets you out of this idea that you have to be fixed and whole and you got to put this all back together the way that it was, and just say, okay, this is what I have, and I'm going to move forward and make do with, make the best of it. Put it in an order that makes sense for me, that allows me to accomplish something. It's a much more flexible way of doing things. Resiliency can be learned, it can be grown, it can be developed by something as simple as just recognizing what your strengths already are. We all have strengths. We all have things that we're good at. And building on those. It doesn't mean starting completely from scratch. It doesn't mean, it may mean identifying something that maybe you don't do well and wanting to work on it, but it can really be something as simple as looking at what you do well and building on that. And understanding that our thoughts and our feelings, they influence our actions. When we feel, when we're having a good day, it's a lot easier to accomplish things. It's a lot easier to think about the future than if we kind of wake up, as we may say, on the wrong side of the bed and feel like it's just from the get-go a challenge. There's something called the self-fulfilling prophecy that can kind of come into effect there, where our mental filter, if we kind of wake up on that wrong side of the bed, the only thing we seem to attend to or tune into are those negative things. And that can make it all of a sudden see, it's 5 o'clock, got through the day, knew it was going to be a bad day. And the reality of it is, it's just a matter of the filter that kind of affected you. Acknowledging stress and learning to cope more effectively with it. Sometimes, people have there's a bit of pride with it. That doesn't bother me. I don't get, worried about that, this, that, and the other thing. Sometimes just acknowledging it can be really, really helpful. And being open to changes and being flexible and adapting to new situations as they come up. One of the most common challenges that I hear of when I work with folks who have multiple sclerosis, and as it relates to transitions, sometimes utilizing some sort of adaptive equipment for the first time and acknowledging maybe that it would be a lot safer to use a walker. It would be a lot safer for me to ambulate, with a cane, whatever that may be. That being open to that can be a real important aspect of this.
Well, and not just safer too, but also make things more accessible. That things that might cause like joy and bring happiness and connection. I think that's a big part of that too.
You're right, and this is the important piece of the emotional and the cognitive part of resilience, because it all starts within ourselves. All of this is about the way that we speak to ourselves in our head. We all have a voice. We all have a voice that's us in our head speaking to us, and that is a really powerful motivator. We think and speak in almost the same words. We think a lot faster, but it's almost an identical dialogue. And that's, as a psychologist, that's my first line of intervention with people. I say it all the time. Like, I can't read people's minds, but I can listen to the way people speak, and it gives me a little window into what's going on in their heads. And so much benefit can come from this last bullet on here, this idea of building compassion and empathy for yourself. Boiled out even simpler than that, cut yourself a break. Like, honestly, the rumination and the racing thoughts, it's this idea of building some compassion and some empathy for yourself. And that's something that can be done. What therapy can help with. There are other ways to do it too, but that's something where if you struggle with that, would be a good thing to focus on. Next slide. So how do you go about changing the way that you might think about something and improving your cognitive resilience? This ABCDE model of how to help yourself, this is a very, very, very simple and basic version of what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. It's about identifying the script that runs in your head when something happens. And this activating event, this A, it's usually something that's stressful, distressing, something that's usually might be labeled as negative, because typically we don't have to go through this if it's something awesome that's happened. So let's, we can kind of reset that right now. But this is a great example to go through. So if you were told that, maybe you're no longer able to safely ride a bicycle, and it's something a lot of folks deal with who like to cycle, and when that happens, the dialogue that stirs up in your head, what you say to yourself about it, and that's the belief about the event that, hey, I love riding, I'll never be able to enjoy that time with my family again, keeps me healthy, now what am I supposed to do? And you can absolutely add any line there that you'd like, that you may, and to any other activating event. This all fits the same equation. And as a result, if you were to have that dialogue with yourself, it would not be unusual to have some feelings of anger, resentment, sadness, frustration. Again, geez, think of all the areas that, and for the sake of this conversation, that MS has affected your ability to do something that you loved doing. I'm sure you can probably all identify with those emotions and more. The next part, though, is the most important, which is to look at the event and the beliefs of the event and try to kind of argue with yourself a little bit about, well, what is it about the situation that may not quite be what I thought that it was? So what are some alternatives? Is it possible that you could get a tricycle and maybe still be able to ride? Keeping in mind, we'll go back to we talked about before about sometimes utilizing adaptive equipment can be a challenge. This is one of those times. Or I wonder what other things I could do to stay active and spend time with my family. This might be a change, but I'm not going to let me stop this from me doing something that I really love. If you're able to just inject those new thoughts. Again, I'm not saying this changes the scenario, this changes the situation, that all of a sudden you're magically going to be able to ride the bicycle again. That is not the point. The point is, though, if you can inject those new alternatives, maybe you start to feel a little bit more optimistic about what your options are. And remember, we talked a little bit about how optimism is one of those characteristics that is involved. It's not naive optimism. It's not like, woohoo, everything's great and it's sunny and I have no problems. And in fact, I would fully expect someone to still feel frustrated, still feel angry that this is going on, and resentful and sad, but perhaps it's a little less. Perhaps it's a little less than when you started out. And all of this happens in seconds in our head, absolute seconds. And so if you're able to start to inject some of those disputing beliefs about this stuff, you actually create some flexibility in your thoughts, some psychological flexibility that takes some of the pressure off. And as a result of this skill, this is a very specific skill that you can develop. You are helping yourself with the ability to develop resiliency in the long run, because now you have something in your toolbox that you can use when stuff comes up again. The next slide. I think, is this you now, Megan?
I think so. So we're going to give you some really practical tips about how to build resilience, and keeping in mind the categories that we spoke about: physical, emotional, cognitive, social, and spiritual, maybe with a little bit of different name, but it's really important to build relationship connections, and that's difficult right now with COVID. However, as a person who has a little bit of healthy optimism, I'd say that there are so many more opportunities for connection to people who are far outside of your neighborhood because of COVID, with what we've been able to do virtually. From a wellness standpoint, mindfulness activities like meditation, breathing, spending time in prayer, spending quiet time off of devices, with maybe you're literally just staring into space and daydreaming, is actually a really powerful way to develop resilience. It's a really powerful way for your body to learn that that you can control your monkey mind. You can control these thoughts that spin and spin and spin and spin out of control and cause a physical reaction. It's a really powerful way for you to learn that you can calm down your nervous system. We've talked about physical activity. I think very important is avoiding coping with drugs and alcohol. There's been quite a frightening uptick in alcohol use with the pandemic. I've seen it personally among my social, my friends in my social circle. I've also seen it clinically in my clinic with the people I take care of. Also purpose. So having a sense of purpose, and many people who've had a major life change because of a chronic medical condition like MS might feel like they've lost their purpose. I know just as many who feel like they've found it, because now they're volunteering in a meaningful way, or they're doing different type of work that they never thought they'd be able to do, helping others, looking for that self-discovery, setting goals can help build resilience, and then healthy thinking, keeping things in perspective, just accepting the fact that change is going to come. It just is. Having a hopeful outlook and learning from the past in the sense that bad things happened and you're still here. So you overcame, it didn't get you. And even if you overcame or it didn't get you and you're not super happy with what your reaction was, there's still time to work on that for the next time change comes about. And then seeking help either professionally with counseling or informal help from friends, family members, clergy is also another way to build resilience. So next slide, we're going to go into like some nitty gritty around these categories. So resilience includes seeing a stressful event as a problem to solve instead of a threat. We're going to give you an example for each of these. So for this, you've noticed more fatigue for 2 to 3 days. So you have two choices. A, you can go right to, oh my God, what if I have to stop working? What if I've lost my job? Or you can call your healthcare provider for an appointment and make a plan to figure out why you have fatigue. So there are two places to go. One, that first one automatically sends your brain into this fight or flight spin that then affects your physical health in addition to your emotional health. Number two, allows you to develop a plan to solve a problem instead of confronting a threat. You can focus on things that you can control and keep those things simple. Like you can control what you want to have for breakfast. If you want eggs, make sure they're in the refrigerator. If you want a smoothie, make sure you have the ingredients that you need. You can control whether or not you say yes to an activity that you like or don't. And I think that Louise presented us with some of the questions that were asked in preparation for the webinar, and one of them was, how do you say no? And the answer is you practice. you pick things that are appropriate for you to say no to, and you just say no. And that actually goes back to goal setting too. If something isn't on your priority list or isn't high on your value set, then you say no to it. And not no, but just no. No, I'm not available. Not no, but maybe next time.
And one of the things that is kind of something that, as you all are even looking at this slide in particular and going through some of these kind of dilemmas, I would encourage you to pay attention to where your mind has a tendency to go to answer. Like, for instance, this the first one there, you notice the fatigue. And if you're a person who kind of your initial response is either A, the wonder if I have to stop working, or if you initially start to kind of get spun up a little bit about something like that, that is one of those times where you can utilize this very webinar to identify some of those vulnerabilities that maybe you have. If you have a tendency when it comes time for your health to be quite reactive in this way, know that about yourself.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah, and accept it, and then make a plan. Just know in your mind that this is where I go, and I don't want to go there. And so I have to be intentional about choosing the alternative. Keeping a record of things that have helped you in the past is also really important. Maybe medicines for certain symptoms that you don't need to take all the time. Maybe certain exercises or stretches for when you have pain or discomfort in certain area. Maybe providers that you love, like you've needed to seek counseling in the past and you established a really good rapport with that person. Maybe motivational quotes like the ones that I used earlier today. We can move on to the next slide. I love keeping a list of personality, strengths, skills, and beliefs. Matt mentioned this earlier, thinking about things that you know are positive qualities about yourself, to the point that you even write them down and put them in a place that's visible, like a Post-it note in your medicine cabinet that says, I am kind. A Post-it note, on your refrigerator that says, I care about people. Just reminding you that, or I'm good at organizing, something like that. Reminding you of all the things that you can do, right, to have resilience. Also lists of support people, resources that help you. And these are things you have to think about. I mean, I can sit and mull in my head, like, who do I call when I need to laugh? Who do I call when I need to vent? Who do I call when I need someone to just commiserate with me? But if I had those things written down, it would be a lot faster. We talked about making strong social connections. I love the gratitude journal. That's a practice that has been actually, if we go back to research, it's been very well studied in anxiety and depression as a method of improving those symptoms. And it really can set the tone for you to go down path B instead of path A. And it takes practice. So doing it daily, sort of just gets you geared up to start thinking that way. Matt mentioned also giving yourself a break and allowing yourself to admit to feeling stress, admit to feeling negative emotions. So you're nurturing the positive ones, but if you deny the fact that you have any negative ones, then you're doing that I'm bending, but I'm not breaking, which ultimately is going to lead to a really clean break that's not so clean. So, breathing in positive feelings, breathing out negative feelings. And if we're going to talk about mindfulness, you can literally do just that. Like, I breathe in calm, I breathe out distress. And you can sit and breathe. I breathe in calm, I breathe out distress. I breathe in calm, I breathe out distress. So good practical hints. Next slide. We talked about mindfulness. It doesn't have to be hard. I laughed when it showed up as like the least likely one that a person would choose, but it's frankly, it's what I see. It's too hard. Takes too long. I'll never get it. Basically, you can sit and take 5 deep breaths and just let them be a little bit longer and slower than your normal breaths, and that's it. That's it. That's mindfulness. Mindfulness is also taking this, which is amazing, and putting it in another room when you're eating and having conversation with your family. That's mindful eating. Mindfulness is being on this webinar and only being on this webinar, not also checking your text messages and returning them as you're on the webinar. So mindfulness does not make you a monk in Thailand. It's really quite easy. Plan for the future. I like to reference our GPS for MS programs at MS, at Can Do MS, really a great way to teach you how to do that. And if you have a plan, then many of your bases will be covered. So it's less to worry about. We talked about finding a sense of meaning and purpose. Many of you choose faith and spirituality as a place to turn to for resilience. Many of you turn to service and you help other people. Learning something new can also help you find a sense of purpose, and you might have to play around with things, but with such gratitude that you can do that. And then use those ABCDEs to learn to tell your story differently and practice doing it. you know, take a situation where you might have gone down a negative path into that spiral, and rewrite it. Rewrite the situation using those ABCDEs, and then speak it to someone.
And,
And you'll, yeah.
I was just thinking as well on this, and you've said several times about this idea of a plan. And, you know, I think that it's important. It's a really, really important point to highlight, and kind of the analogy that fits well with this is when you think about being in a hotel, and on the back of the door of the hotel, they have the fire escape plan, right? They write those plans out, or they print them out and they put them on the back of the doors before any occupancy of the hotel takes place. You don't write out those escape plans during the fire. And 80 to 90%, as much as life is unpredictable, roughly, I'd say, 80, 90%, you could probably do some study on this, but 80 to 90% of our lives are pretty routine. And we can have a plan for 80 to 90% of the stuff that is like going on. And that other 10 to 20%, we can react to, and we can have emergency backup plans, all that kind of stuff. But try to be as deliberate, and even as you said, Megan, to kind of put a smile on my face with this idea of the phone tree or video conferencing tree, whatever it is, the person who it's going to be when I'm frustrated that I'm going to go to. And I'm going to open it up and I'm going to find that, versus trying to figure that out in the moment when it's not necessarily the best and we're not thinking clearly. And it's important. Planning can be really helpful.
Yeah, it just, you know, get a I'm a pen and paper girl. I still have like an old-fashioned journal. Treat yourself to a cool journal, and, you know, make a page for each of these things. And that's just the journal. That's your resilient journal. You know, that's where you go when you need to pull a card out of the hat to help you along a better thought process, which ultimately is better for your emotional health, your quality of life, and your physical health. We can move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I think we have just a few minutes left.
Yeah. So we're just going to talk quickly about a SMART goal. It's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. You can go on to the next slide. And these SMART goals for resilience, we've got a couple of them here, super easy. So I'll practice daily gratitude. I'm going to write down 3 things I'm grateful for each day. I can do this in the morning instead of surfing the internet, which, by the way, makes me anxious. Gratitude helps me feel resilient, and I'm going to spend 5 minutes doing this each day. So this is a great way to measure your progress with practicing resilience. And this is a kind of an emotional practice. And the next slide, is a physical practice. So I love it that so many of you turn to exercise for resilience. So a SMART goal is I will move my body 6 days out of the week. I will stretch or exercise for 20 minutes a day for those 6 days. I actually like to watch the news in the morning. I'm not sure if I have enough time to do both, so I'll do my stretching and exercise while I watch the news, and morning just happens to be my best time of day. I get more energy after I move my body, and it's a time-based goal. I've got it right there. I can measure it. I can meet it.
And this is a great example of, you know, if it's something for some folks that are already exercising, this is a great example of identifying what you're already doing and you do well, and do more of it, or focus on it as a strength. And it really, it can be very reinforcing when you think about how overwhelming it could be to appreciate how you might build resilience. If you're doing it, it's a strength, do more of it.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've reached the end of our presentation, which hopefully was helpful. And I know that answering questions is always helpful. So Louise, you want to drive us home with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan and Matt. That was awesome. Learned so much, and we had so many great questions come in. I'm excited to jump into the Q&A. Before I do, I want to give a reminder to everyone that after the webinar is complete, the box is going to pop up on your screen. Excuse me, asking you to complete our survey. It's a new survey. It's significantly shorter. We're really excited about it. So if you could please take the time to fill it out, it really helps us with our planning processes. A lot of the questions that we got specific to this webinar have to do with COVID-19 and effects of resiliency. So I wanted to start by launching a COVID-specific poll. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. And it is just generally, in what ways has COVID affected your resiliency? And feel free to write in if you have something that's not listed. Great, thank you so much for sharing. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and close it, but please use the question, submit your questions if you have anything that hasn't been shared. And I will share our results really quickly. Great.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to think, and especially, maybe you hadn't really thought too much about COVID and resiliency in the same sentence, but obviously it's having an impact.
Yeah, huge impact. And that kind of jumps into our first question that we got from Mariah. Mariah asked, how do I stay resilient when I'm so isolated? And we've talked about that a little bit today, but maybe you can give us some more specific examples that have worked for you or your patients living with MS.
So one of the first things that this is going to fit right into that cognitive and emotional part of things. Because to be honest, for many folks, there is not a ton that you're going to be able to do to change the difference in the physical isolation of things, right? You may be restricted in some ways from going places. We all had shut down. We all had certain things that we couldn't do. So this idea of understanding that isolation or connectedness can be done electronically. It's not the same. It's certainly not the same as getting that hug from somebody or whatever it may be. It's definitely not the same. However, I think Megan said this before, you can actually intentionally reach out and connect with people halfway or all the way around the world in ways that you may not have really done with much intentionality before. Now it's a little more effortful, but with that effort, it's a little bit more thoughtful. And you may be able to create some groups, some networks, some ways. And if you can start to change the way that you speak to yourself about this isolation, this is just from a cognitive and emotional standpoint, you can start to look forward to these virtual connections. I'm in Cleveland. Megan is in Florida. Maybe before COVID, we would have physically been in the same place doing talks or at conferences or seminars, and that's a lot of fun, and it's really great to see people that way. This is working because we wouldn't have had this opportunity to work together otherwise. So it's just changing the way you think about it that can be helpful, especially when risking going out and doing things may actually not be in the cards for you, and that's understandable.
I taught a yoga class tonight to people living with MS, and I just finished an adaptive training, and in that adaptive yoga training was a quote. I forget the person who spoke the quote, but the quote was, "A community happens when laughter is present." And
That's
so
awesome.
there have been so many incredible communities created virtually. There's a palpable connection virtually that happens that if you're willing to let it in, it is possible.
Great, thank you so much. That was really helpful. The next question we have is from Joanne, and she has a little bit of anxiety around COVID. Obviously, I think we've all suffered some level of anxiety. What are some ways that she can manage that anxiety and stay resilient to it? We're nearing the end, but still a lot of anxiety to be had.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that there now more than ever, there's probably a pretty fair amount of anxiety that is protective, that is healthy for us to ensure that we're staying safe. So I wouldn't suggest that it's all we just need to, alleviate the anxiety, right? And that's kind of reframing it a little bit. Doing it as much as you're comfortable with. knowing yourself, and ultimately, I would say, man, reach out and talk to somebody. Reach out to your healthcare team. Reach out to somebody who kind of does this work. That way, you can kind of gauge a little bit. Step outside of yourself and your own circle, because you may want some reference points. For those of us that deal with this day in and day out, we have a experience that might help determine how much of this anxiety might be problematic and how much of it might just be a part for the course, and we can kind of help you with. But I would say reach out and get some guidance on that. What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm looking through the questions here in the box, and there's a lot about anxiety, and I don't know, I'd call it like double crush anxiety. And what do we do? Hey, buddy, I'll be right there. And what do we do about that? And I think that, reaching out for help from a healthcare provider is extremely important. Reaching out for help from your support system is extremely important. And I can't speak enough about the effects of anxiety on your immune system. So you really want to just nip that in the bud as fast as you can.
And it doesn't have to be about alleviating it and getting rid of it. Part of it can be recognizing that it's anxiety and it's worry, and that's okay. And part of this developing some resilience will help you not necessarily maybe overreact to some of that anxiety, recognizing those negative emotions, and then kind of going from there.
Yep.
Great, thank you so much. I think our final question of the evening is a great question we haven't talked a lot about, but how can a support partner with someone with MS remain resilient, encourage resilience? What should a support partner be looking to contribute in terms of resiliency?
So I mean, everything that we spoke about tonight also applies to support partners, including, the self-care and taking time for yourself. As if you've been on Can Do webinars specifically for support partners are at risk for medical conditions because of being supportive all the time. So, you need time to do all of the things that we mentioned in all of the categories that we mentioned. And also perhaps to be the person to encourage time for the person you're supporting to do their things. There's a two-way street of guilt in relationships, right? Whether it's a marital relationship or a familial relationship. And we all, I think, appreciate permission.
Yeah, the short answer absolutely is the very same things we're talking about as a whole. None of this had any specific thing that is purely about MS. And as we talk about developing resilience, it's the same stuff. And I think that's the really one of the coolest parts about Can Do is so much of what Can Do emphasizes is that the support, the care for the support partner. It's integral to the mission, and I think that's different than a lot of places. So I think that exploring some of the other webinars and some of the things that are archived in resources on the Can Do would go a long way. But the truth is, it's a lot of the same stuff. It's just a little bit of a different perspective.
Louise, I just want to say real quick before we wrap up, having looked at some of those questions from earlier, a lot of them were about, organizing, prioritizing, having the energy to do certain things. And so I, make a shameless plug for asking your healthcare provider to see an occupational therapist to help you with energy conservation, prioritizing, any cognitive issues that you might be having that might clog up your ability to implement some of this resilience information. So that's all I wanted to say.
Not shameless at all. It's a great plug.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I just want to walk through our March programs really quickly. March is MS Awareness Month. We're really excited about it. We're going to continue talking about resiliency. So please join us. You can register for all of these events at cando-ms.org. Want to make you aware that you can also find our Can Do program application at cando-ms.org. For over 40 years, the Can Do program has been leading MS health and wellness program, and this year it goes virtual for 3 days. The first Can Do program is from April 29th through May 1st, but the application deadline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. So please go to cando-ms.org to have an opportunity to participate in that program. We'd love to have you. Please connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Big thank you to the National MS Society. You can learn more about their resources and services at nationalmssociety.org. And we just want to say thank you. Thank you for spending your evening with us. Again, at the end of this webinar, a box is going to pop up with our new survey. It is significantly shorter, so we ask that you complete it. It'd be a huge help to us. And big thanks to Megan and Matt. Thank you for spending the evening with us. We appreciate you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
have a good night. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, have a wonderful evening. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks. Bye-bye.